Got 20 seconds. Come on, man, to go.
Keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. Good. Get those knees up. Explode. Good. Explode. Let's go. Up.
Rock forward. Let's go. One more. Go.
You are listening to the Fight Strength Podcast with your hosts, Phil Daru and Jason Burgos.
Hello there, fighting and fitness fans, and thank you for listening to episode 14 of the Fight Strength Podcast. I am Jason Burgos, editor and contributor for MMAsucker.com, and with me, as always, is the very esteemed and the very bearded strength and conditioning grand master of American Top Team, the one and only Phil Daru, a.k.a. Aristotle. Phil, what is up?
This is the very Hurricane Irma edition of the Fight Strength Podcast.
Like, are you prepared? Like, how is it going? I mean, you guys are what, like, this is almost like a countdown to like a missile launch. Like, your T-minus is probably what, like 7 hours away from dealing with this nonsense and Mother Nature being a biatch. Like, how are you guys doing down there? Are you well prepared? Is the house wrapped in bubble? Is the state wrapped in bubble? What is going on?
I mean, this isn't our first go around with hurricanes, as you know. You know, this is probably my 5th hurricane that I'll be going through. So we take the proper precautions, making sure everything's, you know, wrapped up and ready to go and bunkered down so we can make it happen. But it still sucks. It is what it is. But whatever, it's good. It's good. You know why? Because it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable. And I like to be uncomfortable at times. You know, it kind of makes me tougher. So it's not a big deal for me.
All right, fair enough. All right. Now, on today's show, we will have the pleasure of bringing on a very talented strength and conditioning coach who has trained many high-level athletes from the world of football, hockey, combat sports, and that is PJ Nestler. Now, Phil, I know you were pretty pumped about having TJ on the show today. You were pretty excited when we were leading up to the show.
Yeah, no, I mean, and I've been following PJ for a while now, and Andy Galpin works with him closely. PJ is one of those guys that he's new, but not new. You know, he's been in the game for 10, 12 years, but now just breaking on the scene, and I follow him. He follows my stuff, and there's just a good mutual respect there. And he's doing a lot of great things, and I'm happy that he's working with more MMA and BJJ guys because that gives us more credibility in this industry, and also it helps out the fighters to have such an esteemed and knowledgeable coach in the industry. So I'm definitely excited to see what he has to say and what he has going on.
Now, before we move on to our Ask the Roo segment, I mean, you guys know how it is. If you haven't listened to the show before, hopefully this is you're enjoying the first time listening. And for the people that have listened, you know, I would be remiss in not mentioning you could check out all of our previous episodes with guests like Zach Evanesh, Ioana Jędrzejczyk, Dean Thomas, King Mo, Dr. Corey Peacock, on our pages at SoundCloud, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Google Play Music, and on my personal YouTube page. Check out the ones you've missed and give us a comment, please. Share if you dig it. That would be much appreciated. Now, as always, the Ask Daru segment is sponsored by Daru Strong Training Systems. If you want to find ways to live a stronger and healthier life like a high-level athlete, then you need to learn more about this training system. Now, hopefully you're prepared for this. I didn't check in beforehand, but we like to pair up a motivational quote with our plug.
Always prepared.
Oh, now
Always
we always have like a little motivational quote with our plug for your training system. What motivational words do you have for our listeners tonight, the bearded Aristotle?
This is for all of my Florida peeps out there. Okay. When adversity stares you in the eyes, you have 2 options. You can either run or sprint towards it. True obstacles can define one's character. You find out real quickly what type of person you are. The choice is yours. You can fight or flight. I'll choose to fight every time. Boom.
I'm probably going to choose the flight, but you know, because I run pretty fast and I'm preparing for our races down the line.
We know you're soft ass run.
Well, all right. So, now for our Ask the Roo segment, we have a question from Connor Heaney from Instagram. He asks, when targeting, and I hope I got this right. I mean, his question was a lot of stuff in it. I hope I put it together right. When targeting your lactic conditioning, what ratios would you work to? Now, from my reading, this is him speaking, a 1-to-3 ratio is advised from the NCSA Essentials. However, do you reduce this to try to replicate more fight work to rest ratios?
Mhm.
I don't know
Yeah,
what he
so
said in any of that, but I hope that you can explain that for me.
yeah, so let me go ahead and break this down.
Oh,
Before
yeah.
I dive into what
Yeah.
lactic conditioning is, let's take a look at all energy systems as a whole and fully break down exactly what's going on. Now, you have you have distinctly three major energy systems or demands, and they are alactic, that's ran off of ATP and creatine phosphate, lactic or glycolytic, which we talked about plenty of times on the show, which we'll dive into later, and of course your aerobic or your oxidative systems. Now, before developing a solid all around conditioning base, you must start with building a solid aerobic base. By doing this, you will jumpstart the entire energy system's ability to strengthen. As studies show, without building a solid aerobic base, the creatine phosphate system or alactic system cannot be regenerated adequately. So basically, meaning that if you don't get your ass running and get a better aerobic capacity,
Hmm.
your chances of being explosive for a long duration may not happen.
Hmm.
So this would cause you to dip too far into your glycolytic energy system. Now, this would be causing fatigue to present itself more quickly.
Mm.
Now, once this occurs, your body's only defense is to decrease your power output, causing a decrease in obviously overall performance. Now, you're asking about how or why do I care about this for building my lactic conditioning? Now, it's simple. If I have to get into glycolytic energy, then you will optimize your quality of performance. So, basically stating, I consider myself more of a performance specialist with strength being a major driver.
Mhm.
But when it comes to conditioning, most of the true conditioning should come from the sport itself, meaning as fighters, the main source of energy systems training should come from the skills work practice, like sparring, grappling, wrestling, things like that. That's where you're really going to get your true conditioning because it's the specificity of sport. It's what you're going to be doing in competition. Now, that doesn't mean I won't put fighters through a lactic conditioning circuit or metabolic conditioning training if I feel they need it, right? So, ideally, from a fighter's perspective, these people are pretty much unlike any other athlete. They are used to getting or going deep into that lactic exhaustion and having to battle back from it in a sense. I make sure we test that as effectively as possible without hindering the quality of training and that stimulus that we're trying to attain. Now, for my fighter lactic conditioning or Metcon, we would perform 45 to 60-second intervals of work followed by 1 minute recovery, which at that time, depending on how in shape they are, will have them perform an active recovery by shadowboxing or just snake charming.
Hmm.
Or I can simply have them sit on a stool with controlled breathing techniques such as Okinawa breathing
Hmm.
or diaphragmatic breathing to help slow down the heart rate for the next round. This will actually be more sport specific. This is something we would do primarily getting towards the fight itself, more about 2 to 3 weeks out. Now, this will be done for 5 minute rounds for 3 to 5 rounds, depending on title fights or not. And that's just my take on that. Now,
Mm.
if you definitely want to get into full details on conditioning for MMA, check out Joel Jamison's work and his website, 8weeksout.com. This guy knows his stuff, and when it comes to that, but for me, that's my approach on it. Take it how you want it.
So it's pretty much take it or leave it. That's what you're saying.
That's it, man. That's it.
Very, very wise words. Now, I would like to welcome on our guest. He is a strength coach that has worked with a rather diverse set of athletes, including many combat athletes, during a career in the strength and conditioning industry that now spans over a decade. He is currently the director of performance at Extreme Performance Training. He has contributed written pieces for many sites, including Fighting Camp, FightCampConditioning.com, Stack.com, and BarbellShrug.com. You can also learn a lot of fantastic training tips on his YouTube page and on his Instagram account, which you can find at Coach PJ Nest 24. And that man is the very knowledgeable PJ Nestler. Thank you for coming on the show this morning, PJ.
Thank you guys very much for having me.
All right, PJ. Now, Coach, give us I know we've said pretty much an intro here, but give us a quick background on how you got started in the field and your transition to work with MMA fighters and just all your athletes that you have over there.
Sure. I got into strength and conditioning back in college, actually. I was in college for business, and I transferred schools and I ended up playing football my sophomore year at the University of Rhode Island and worked with the strength and conditioning coach there. And I had always been super into fitness. I actually wanted to go to school for something fitness related, but I thought the only route was to be a personal trainer at the YMCA or something, and that just wasn't the route for me. So when I worked with the strength and conditioning coach, I saw that there was a path here, an actual career, and you could work with athletes. And I switched over to kinesiology at that point, and just everything's been full force in that. So when I stopped playing football, I actually started training MMA at a local gym in Rhode Island because I was looking for something to do to keep me active. And I had always been a fan of MMA, so I just started training. And that kind of, those two passions for strength and conditioning as well as MMA kind of sparked right at the same time, and then started to build as I was in college. And when I was in college, I was lucky to have a mentor who told me to get in the field and get experience. So I started doing every volunteer internship I could possibly find. And I was fortunate enough that by the time I graduated, I had experience working as an intern at the Division I strength and conditioning level at multiple different private sectors at a high school. And then I started working a little bit in the private sector and actually ended up getting a job as a paid intern back at the University of Rhode Island as a strength and conditioning coach there. And so I spent my first 2.5 years in strength and conditioning in the collegiate sector. And I I became an assistant pretty quickly. And then I was we had a very small strength and conditioning department, and our head strength coach took a leave of absence. So myself and the other assistant were running the entire program for 18 varsity sports. So it was a tough learning experience, but it was really good. I learned a lot, and I got to work with a ton of athletes and a lot of different teams.
Cool.
But I always wanted to work with fighters, and that was kind of something that and I also wanted to be in Southern California. So at a certain point, I just took a leap of faith and moved to Southern California with the hope of working my way back up. I took an entry-level job and hopefully working my way back up to a higher-level position and working with some fighters and working out here in the private sector for a while.
Yeah.
But finally, after a couple of years, I got an opportunity to work with a jiu-jitsu fighter, and I told him that this was my passion. This is what I love to do, and if he enjoys the training, the only thing I ask of him is that he tells his teammates about it. And after about 3 weeks of working with him, he brought in another guy, and it started to snowball from there.
Gotcha. Now, do you still train? Are you still training MMA or jiu-jitsu or anything like that right now?
I try to train a little jiu-jitsu, but I haven't been very consistent at all.
Yeah.
But I still love it. Yeah, it's just, you know how it is being in the gym. The times that they've got classes and stuff to train jiu-jitsu is the exact times that people want to train in the gym. So
definitely,
it's been really tough. But I still, anytime I get an opportunity, we've got some mats and a cage in the gym I'm at. So I had an intern who was training jiu-jitsu, and we'd take a break and and roll around, and I'll jump in with the boxing coach who's over there and hit mitts every once in a while. But I still love the sport, all the combat sports, but I don't get to do them as much as I'd like to.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I've originally watched your Barbell Shrugged episode. Now, you were talking a little bit about auto-regulating fighters once they come in. Now, as an S&C coach for MMA in general, this is highly prevalent because of the fact that they are training multiple modalities throughout the day. Can you take us through your standard criteria on how you would alter a workout depending on how the fighter is actually feeling that day, or just in general?
Yeah, for sure. So I've got a lot of my programs are kind of set up. I train my MMA guys in a group setting in the afternoons, 3 days a week. And they're always at all different points. As you know, some guys are in camp, some guys haven't been training in a month. And so they're always kind of all over the place. And depending on what we have planned for the day, I used to use a lot of jump testing to kind of test their nervous system fatigue and see where they were at. I don't have a jump mat anymore at the new location I'm at, so I don't use it anymore. But I do a lot of auto-regulating just by seeing them and just by asking them a lot of questions, what they did, how it went, how they're feeling. Yeah. But what I'll really try to do is figure out if they are beat up, if they've already trained really hard that day, if they're already in a certain level of fatigue and they look kind of sluggish and slow in the warm up, if I have planned a speed power session or something for that day where we need to be fresh and we need to be feeling good, then I'll start to switch that up, and maybe we'll do a little bit more strength work that day, or maybe depending on how far gone they are. Sometimes we'll switch it up and we'll do some mobility work, or we'll get some aerobic conditioning in. Um, and I like to. The goal for me is usually not to let them know that we're doing that, but just shifting things on the fly and letting them know, connecting it to them, and hey, this is what I want to get today, because I really feel like you need to get some aerobic work in, and we're going to do this and this. Don't let them know that we're kicking it down because they're beat up, because they don't like that. But sometimes I do let them know.
Yeah, definitely, man. They definitely want to work hard, even if they feel like shit. So I understand that.
Oh yeah.
Now, so from a preparation standpoint, I like to get your take on periodization progressions and any type of modalities that you would use to structure your programs for your fighters. Now, let's say you get a guy that's like 8 weeks out from a fight. Where's your standpoint from there going further?
The first thing I really do is I assess the athlete, what they really need, what their strengths and weaknesses are.
Mm-hmm.
And what I like to do is hopefully I get them way before the 8 weeks out. And outside of the training camp is when I really focus on building up their weaknesses, their inefficiencies, their asymmetries, all that kind of stuff. So, for example, I've got a fighter now who is really powerful and really strong and fast, but he's outside of training camp, and he lacks a little bit in the aerobic conditioning and in some mobility and some structural balance. So we spend a lot of time doing that stuff outside of camp. Once they're inside camp, because all their other training picks up so much, I like to focus then on just peaking their strengths. So if they're an athlete who needs one of my fighters, she's more of a kickboxer, and she's very, very elastic, very fast. So inside of training camp, we focus on maintaining some of the other qualities we've built outside of camp, and then peaking those speed power qualities. And there's usually going to be a speed power component to any of them, because that's we know we lose that a lot quicker than anything else. So we're always going to touch on that near the end of camp to keep them feeling fast. But that's kind of how I lay out the training camp. And it'll usually be, if we've got 8 weeks, it'll usually be 2 phases, depending on at what point we started camp.
Perfect.
So I might do 2 4-week phases. Well, really 2 3-week phases with maybe a little bit of a deload in there.
Yep,
and then again, they're going to deload fight week. So it's usually 3 to 4 weeks of work. And the way I separate those out day by day has varied a lot. Sometimes I'll do kind of a daily undulating program where we'll have a speed power day, we'll have more of a strength day, and we'll have more of a conditioning day. And then other times, if they need something more, I might do a little bit more of a linear style periodization where we're kind of focused in a specific block, and we've got 2 days of more strength work or speed power work or whatever the kind of focus is for that block. And then we'll sprinkle in the other things to make sure we're maintaining some of those other qualities. But that's really dependent on the athlete and the camp and a lot of other variables.
Yeah, it sounds good. I mean, you definitely are doing the right things from my point of view. I see it now. It's more prevalent with all the other strength coaches that I've actually got a chance to interview, is that we definitely want to build a solid aerobic and strength base in the out of camp, off season type deal. And then from there, you would go ahead and do your 3-week ways with your deload, which is perfect, man. So just keep on doing it, man. I like what you're doing over there.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, as you know, when I first started with a lot of MMA guys, I was trying to get really crazy with my programming and really put the pieces together in these super advanced kind of peaking protocols. And then I realized that most of these guys, it's just getting them on a consistent schedule and making sure they stay healthy and giving them a progressive program, because the 90% of the coaches out there, unfortunately, aren't doing that. A lot of these guys come to me and I'm seeing the coaches they used to train with, and it's just like they just show up and do stuff. And we just crawl around, and then we throw some stuff, and then we stand on this belt, and we get really sweaty, and we go really hard, and he yells and screams at me, and I'm like, Jesus, all right, well, let's just I'll put you on such a simple, basic program, and you're going to feel so much better than you've ever felt in your life. And then we'll get to the advanced stuff once you develop that. And luckily now, most of the athletes I've been working with for a few years, so we can get a little bit more advanced with some of the things that we do.
Phil, you don't make people get sweaty and throw stuff and you let them either?
Listen, relax. All right. Don't
There's
put it down like that. Listen. So what I see a lot is that if I have to pull my guys back a lot of the times. Is in PJ, the same thing. It's that if they don't feel like they're getting crushed, they're not really training in a sense. But once you get them to actually buy into the system and understand the protocol and the program, it's better. It's better for them, for one, and two, they understand that they are actually going to get better by resting, by taking a little bit of a break and doing things to actually help their performance in the long run.
right.
So no, we don't do a shit ton of metcons. We're not trying to kill people. Let's make it happen.
I know. I hear you yelling a lot in these videos. So I don't know. I just want to make sure.
It's for the gram, bro.
Oh.
Yeah, that's different.
Now you answered this a little bit, but on a podcast appearance, you talked about the general performance testing you put the athletes through that come to you for training. However, you mentioned how you have a different testing for fighters, such as a specific fighter intake form. Could you explain the differences, like what that form is in terms of, and other further testing you have for fighters compared to other athletes that you have coming in to work with you?
Yeah, so the fighter intake that I came up with a while ago, and to be honest, I don't use it anymore. But I developed it when I was working at a facility. We did a lot of testing. We had a lot of equipment, so I developed the performance testing for our general athletes, and then I tweaked it for my fighters because I realized that the general testing, I was taking fighters through it, but then I was throwing it away and not really using it. So I started to tweak it a little bit, and really the biggest difference is, or the biggest piece that I used was force velocity profiling on the jump mat, to give me kind of a snapshot of how these athletes like to produce force. So I would do a couple different jump tests. I'm sure, Phil, you're familiar with force velocity profiling. So doing a non-counter movement jump, and then a counter movement jump, and then some other kind of reactive jumps, and just looking at how those things compare to each other, and therefore how these athletes produce force, if they're really strong and powerful, but they're not super elastic, or vice versa. And that'll give me a pretty good understanding of what they need in their programming inside and outside of camp. And then I had a few other things that we do. We did a pull-up test just to look at relative upper body strength. We did a rotational med ball throw, and that one really, the number was arbitrary. I was just looking at how they produce force from the ground to throw a med ball in a rotational pattern. And you'd think fighters would be phenomenal at this. And I'd watch a lot of guys just using their trunk to just toss this ball and not understanding how to use the ground to produce this force. So I had a kind of a bunch of pieces like that. And then again, I moved to a new facility where I don't have a lot of those tools. And I looked at it and realized that I was doing this testing we also did a few different FMS type movements to look at patterns and see if there's any dysfunction. But what I realized pretty quickly was, after doing this for a long time, I could bring an athlete in and take him through a basic session, and I could see everything I needed to see that I was getting from that 90 minutes of testing.
True.
So I kind of threw that stuff out, and I think it was good originally because it gave me a kind of a baseline, and I also had other coaches who were working with me and helping me with some of my fighters. So it was a way for us to communicate where we knew the standard. So if he just looked at the testing sheet, he could see, oh, well, okay, I see what he marked off here, so I understand what he saw. But now I don't have that. So I've kind of developed my coaching eye to the point where I can see enough of what I need to see to figure out what those athletes, how they like to produce force, where their inefficiencies are, what kind of balance they have through different joints and different sides. So I don't use that testing system that I created anymore, but I still, all of the guidelines that I was looking at, I still use in my first initial session with an athlete. And a lot of them I can get from just talking to people now in my conversation. I ask a lot of really targeted questions, and I can get a pretty good guess of, like, okay, based on what you said you like to do, how you like to train, how I see you move in your fight, I can guess how you like to produce force, if you're more elastic or more contractile, and a lot of other stuff. And it gives me a pretty good baseline.
Yeah, every day seems like a day of evaluation. Every training day is set for that. And I mean, PJ, you can attest it or not, but I feel like every day they come in, we have to make sure that we're actually fully capable of looking at what's going on in that day because like I said, every day is an evaluation and everything can change from that day on because they are getting hit. They're doing multiple, training sessions throughout that day. And it's a high impact sport. So you have injuries upon injuries and we have to work around that each and every day.
Yeah, and that's a great point because you test somebody on the FMS and say, wow, okay, she has great shoulder mobility. That's not something I have to worry about. And then 2 weeks from now, she comes in and she can barely get her arm up to 90 degrees because she got slammed on her shoulder 14 times. So if I'm operating on the testing sheet I looked at 2 months ago, as she has great shoulder mobility, I have to be able to assess that kind of dysfunction as we go and see that she's limited and has restrictions and has all those issues. And you're right, it changes week to week, day to day with a lot of these guys.
And we've had on other strength coaches like Dr. Andy Galpin and Dr. Corey Peacock on the show, and they have mentioned getting fighters out of bad habits that they developed before they got to them. And you've even talked about it a little bit too. How much of those early stages when you have a new fighter, when you're working with them, is getting them out of those bad habits and training and correcting their techniques, or is it not as bad as I think?
It's really bad, but not bad habits in the sense that it's not as many bad habits with the fighting skill, but it's just they have found a way to compensate. They're master compensators. So they have found a way to get to the highest level, even despite the fact that their ankle is so dysfunctional. You'd think that they were going to have massive knee and hip injuries. Wow. They don't yet. And they found a way to produce force and to kick and to throw with it, or, to fight for 17 fights, even though they can't lift one arm over their head. They found a way to compensate and to get through that stuff so that and a lot of them, especially some of the guys I work with, some of them are, right now I've got an MMA group and there's only one from America. The other one's from Italy and Russia. And they'll come through some of these organizations where they just fought anybody at any time. They didn't really go to doctors and they've got injuries that they can't even explain to me. And they're just, the shoulder doesn't move. And I don't know the injury history. And I don't know that they've had 2 surgeries that they can't explain what they were. Yep. So a lot of it is just kind of like working that stuff in, but you've got to, like Phil said before, you've got to give them what they think they need as well. So if you just come in and go, holy shit, this guy's so broken. Okay, we're just going to do breathing and we're going to do mobility and we're going to correct all these dysfunctions. They're going to be like, screw you, I'm not doing this. I'm a fighter.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's kind of like, I've got one MMA fighter I've been working with now for 3.5 years, and we're still correcting some stuff. And she's made massive improvements, but there's still things that were baseline that we're, adding in and correcting, and they've changed as we went. But some of the biggest habits I work with them on, to be honest, is breathing.
Yeah.
I've got some of these guys that they're like such massive hyperventilators and overbreathers, and they have no idea how to control their breathing. I'm like, man, I don't know how you survive for 2 straight hours of practice, but you manage. But you're just doing so many things inefficiently. So that's kind of the big thing, is teaching them that, hey, you're not doing this stuff wrong, but we can make it so much more efficient and we can make the cost so much less.
Yeah. I think that they're optimal in specificity of sport. The way they do their sport, they're good at it because they've been doing it forever. So the way they move, the way they breathe, they can understand how to pace themselves in a such way, right? But when they go into a different realm, like our realm, where you have to move in all different directions, multi-directional, and the breathing becomes a major issue because they don't understand how to breathe and how to move in those different directions. Only the linear approaches that they've learned through their specificity of their sport. But like I said, and same with you, PJ, man, we give them what they want and then we give them what they need. And that's usually how we can keep them buying into the system. But in general, through fighting, and I have this with a lot of my guys here and girls, that, through damage that they've taken throughout the years, we have to make sure that we are working towards getting them, obviously, getting the dysfunction out of them. But in the same way, they've learned to compensate through their injuries, and that becomes an issue. And I understand exactly what he's talking about because I've worked with a guy for 2 years now, and we're still working on the same things. Wow. and it's just because it's over and over and over again, and it just happens to be that way. But it is what it is at this point.
And it's tough because you only have them so many hours. So even if you're working on something specific, you're not working on it for 3 straight hours every week, because you've got other stuff you're working on. And then they're going and they're practicing MMA for 10 hours a week. So you're taking one step forward and 2 steps back. So it takes you a long time to get to that end result.
For sure. Now, me and you both work with a lot of BJJ and MMA guys. Now, that age-old notion now, lifting weights and strength training will get you stiffer and slower. I don't even know why people are still saying this shit. But now, can you please explain how you get a fighter or grappler to fully buy into your program? Go ahead.
Oh, man, great question. I'd say that the biggest thing that I do is, and probably the biggest thing I do in general with the athletes I work with, and I told this to my intern yesterday, the bigger piece that he needs to learn from me is not the programming, is not anything. It's the buy-in, and it's how I communicate with each of these athletes and how I get them to buy into every little thing that we do. And the bigger thing is I do a very long consultation early on, and I ask a lot of questions, and I really dig into their psychology, and I dig into their past fights and what went wrong and what they've struggled with and what the psychology of what was going on and where they struggled in training, and as much background as I can possibly get on these guys to figure out as all their fears, all their struggles, and working with a lot of fighters, you kind of realize that every single fighter, one of their biggest fears is gassing out in a fight. Yeah. So kind of understanding some of those things and then being able to communicate each individual piece that we're using in our training and connect it to, hey, remember when you told me you had that issue? Well, this is actually going to help you to do that better. Or this isn't it, but we have to do this first because the next piece is going to help you to do that better. And I don't want you to ever have that feeling again where your grips were so fatigued you couldn't close that choke and you couldn't finish that fight. So this is what we're going to do. And so connecting all that stuff in is huge. And a lot of them, when they connect those pieces, they understand it, but it takes time. And then the other side of that is being humble enough to change my own approach when needed. So being flexible, so they know that if there's something they really don't like, or they come in, because they'll come in some days and say, hey, man, I think I need more conditioning. I felt like today in sparring, I didn't really feel good. And I think I need more conditioning. I say, look, you don't need more conditioning. We're not at that point in camp. I don't expect you to be able to do 7 straight rounds right now. You also were fatigued from yesterday. You're fighting a cold. Yep. But then they say, well, you can see it when they're listening and they're buying in, or if they're like just saying yes. So sometimes I'll just say, look, all right, you know what? Let's switch it up today. Let's do this and give them a little bit and show them that I'm not the guy who's like, you have to do this and you have to, okay, you don't really want to lift heavy weights today? Fine, we'll do something else. We'll find a new way to get you better and I'll shift it and I'll be flexible with you. So they know that I'm there for them. Yeah. And that's really the ultimate thing. As they start to learn that, hey, I'm here 100% for you. I don't care about my own ego, my own programs, anything. It is, what do I have to do to get you to this goal? And when they find that, when they know that, and they know that you're also willing to be flexible, they buy in a lot more. And they'll do a lot more of what you say. And I've got guys now that come in, one of my Russian guy says every time, he doesn't like anything that's not like explosive or heavy. He calls them exercises for women's. So anytime he comes in, he'll say, what are we doing today? More exercises for women's? So if I put him on mini bands, or we're doing bow slide leg curls, or just any stability ball, anything like that, he doesn't like it. He calls it exercises for women's, but he does it. Because he's bought in enough, he knows that I'm not going to waste his time, and I'm not going to give him a bunch of crap that he doesn't need. And that my ultimate goal is I want to get him to where he wants to be. So because I understand his psychology so much, and I understand his goals and his fears, and that's a lot of what I do with athletes, and that's how I get people so bought into my programs, is because I dig so deep that I'm able to connect every single bit of work to be done to their ultimate end goals and to their fears. And that's why they're like, okay, this guy understands me, he gets me, and he has my best interest in mind, so I trust him.
Perfect. Yeah, it's like the art of coaching, like learning the psychology of this whole endeavor and learning the fighter in general goes a long way. And you could tell when a fighter truly trusts in the coach because they're apt to go ahead and ask them questions and talk to them if they're feeling a certain way and not kind of shy away and just kind of go with the program. So you're definitely doing the right things, brother. That's awesome. Um,
Thank you.
yeah. So now, since these athletes are putting in numerous amounts of volume and frequency on a training week or day, what are some of your recovery methods and ways that you monitor that fatigue as you work with these athletes going further?
So our recovery, one of the big things I have for recovery is I sit down with these guys and I plan out their training week, and I put specific recovery into their training week,
Sure.
just to have something. I don't care what the, I mean, I do, but to start off, I don't care what the method of choice is, as long as we have, okay, we have 10 planned sessions. We need at least 4 recovery things in this week, whether that's a 10-minute post-exercise drill, a day, a recovery practice. We need to plan this stuff out just like we're planning our training. And that's, again, one of the biggest pieces because they're not doing that. So when we sit down and we put this stuff in, it just puts it in their mind that, hey, recovery is a workout. It's a part of what we're doing. And I do a lot of whiteboard talks with my guys. I do a lot of
That's cool.
meetings where we kind of go through. I try to take, I'm kind of going on a tangent, but I try to take a very professional approach to the sport because I think it's the biggest thing missing in the sport.
Yeah,
Right
for sure.
now, this sport is full of fighters who fight
Mm-hmm.
and coaches who coach fighters.
Yeah.
And, as you know, Phil, if you look at the NFL, the NBA, these kind of sports, these guys are professionals. They wake up at 7 and they do mobility work, and then they do meetings, and then they're studying film, and then they go to practice, and then they have a massage, and then they're taking care of their body or their mind 8-10 hours a day because this is their job. This is a professional approach. Whereas we have guys who they wake up at 9:30, they go spar from 10 to noon, and then they kind of dick around and they might eat some crap for lunch, and then they go do some training at 4, and then guys, you're not a professional if you're working 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
There's no job in the world you work 4 hours a day, especially to be a champion. So that's kind of the approach I take first is we need to fill in all these other hours with something that is getting you towards your end goal. And that might be recovery. That might be just chilling and taking a nap. That might be nutrition. But some of the specific methods that I use, I have been doing some pool training. And pool training has been a very new thing. I was doing some basic pool stuff, things I used to do with the NFL Combine guys on our recovery days. And it was just kind of some low-level aerobic circuits in the pool.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I've been working with this company, XPT, I've been learning a ton of new pool stuff, which has had a massive impact, I think, on my guys. And we use it on our recovery day because it's very low impact. It's still very aerobic based. But we spend 25 to 30 minutes breathing.
Nice.
And then we get in the pool and we do a lot of this training. And the nice part about some of the stuff we do is we're doing some hypoxic stuff. So they're doing swims underwater without breathing.
Yeah, perfect.
And the great thing that I found is it pushes them to their mental barrier.
Sure.
And they have to break past it over and over. And so I get to do what they all want, which is they want to get pushed so hard that they're about to break. But we don't do a lot of that because, to take a professional MMA guy, I'm going to have to work his ass off for an hour and a half straight to get him physically to the point where he's about to break mentally because these guys are so tough. But put him in the water and make him swim underwater without breathing and some of the other stuff that we're doing, they find that wall a lot quicker.
Oh, yeah.
And we're putting no stress on their system and on their body to do it. So we do some cool stuff on Saturday mornings usually. We're not doing it today, but Saturday mornings we'll do a recovery pool session. And then I'll have them use some specific stuff. I use the sauna a lot as well, which I've been doing a ton of research into the sauna for actually some good benefits, but as well as recovery. So they'll do that. Luckily at the Ruka gym where a lot of my guys train, they've got a sauna and ice bath there.
Yeah.
So I don't have them do the ice bath. I have them do the sauna post-training 2 or 3 days a week. That's another thing, a ton of research I've been looking into now that I've been working with XPT.
Yeah. Is that the same thing as the hypothermic conditioning? Is that what you're talking about, or is that something different?
For sauna stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So a lot of the research I've actually been looking at was from somebody named Dr. Rhonda Patrick.
Yeah. That's what about
She has a
that
bunch
a
of
couple
research
times.
that's a lot on like mice and rats and stuff, but she also
Hmm.
has some human research. And then there's been some other stuff I've been looking at, but there's a
Hmm.
lot of good stuff coming out about the sauna
Sure.
the sauna use at certain temperatures for recovery and for
Mhm.
increased mitochondria and a whole bunch of other, increasing heat shock protein, so it helps to your other proteins to not get broken down, so you're not using those proteins in muscle tissue, and a lot of really good stuff that we're finding in terms of the benefits of that. So I don't even know that much yet. I'm still digging into the research, but I know enough to say, hey, it could be really beneficial, and it looks like it
Mhm.
is, and it's definitely not making us worse. So we have access to it. Let's get our ass in there, and we spend. I have them go in there for about 25 to 30 minutes uh,
Yep.
at 175 degrees post training, 2 to 3 days a week.
Mhm.
Um, that's one of our recovery methods. And then outside of that, we do a ton of breathing stuff. We'll
Mhm.
do some breathing post training just to kind of bring them back down and kickstart a little bit into the parasympathetic state.
Yep.
So by the
Mhm.
time they leave the gym, they're already in that rest and digest and recovery mode versus staying cranked up in the sympathetic all the time.
Mhm.
Those are some of the primary methods that we're using. And guys will jump in an ice bath here if they like it
Yep.
and it helps them and they feel better afterwards. That's a lot of the stuff when it comes to recoveries.
Mhm.
There may not be the exact science that says, well, if you
Yep.
like it, you feel better doing it. That's a
Exactly.
big part of recovery.
Yeah.
So if you hate the
Psychological.
ice bath,
Yeah.
yeah, if you hate the ice bath, you hate every second of it, and you don't feel better afterwards, then don't go in it. But if you
Yeah.
feel better afterwards, then do it. If you like to foam roll, if you like to stretch, if you like to breathe, any of those tools can be great. It's really kind of finding the ones that the most bought in psychologically, and then
Yeah. My guys usually. I mean, I usually go off of a contrast bath where we'll do either a cold bath for around say 2 minutes and then go right into a hot shower for 3 minutes, and we would do that for about 6 rounds, and they pretty much like that more than anything because they don't have to stay into the they don't have to stay into the cold tub and they hop into the hot shower, so it kind of gives them that little bit of change in between. And also the breathing techniques, also like I'll have them prop their feet up on the wall and do diaphragmatic breathing for like a minute or two, big 6 to 10 deep belly breaths in, just trying to get their body back to parasympathetic. But definitely a good. I need to talk to you though about that pool workout though for sure.
yeah, man, you'll be seeing a lot of stuff coming out with me for that because I'm now the director of performance for XPT, and we're putting all this stuff into a certification system and piecing all this stuff out. But I've been learning a ton about it, and there's definitely some big physiological benefits, but there's massive psychological benefits as well. So it's been
Yep.
a fun experience, as well as the hot and cold exposures and some of the
Hmm.
breathing. I mean, that's really kind of the foundation of XPT is
Hmm.
breathing, movement, mobility, hot and cold exposures, and pool training. So,
Nice.
I,
but like you said, it's kind of showing them. I love the contrast baths too.
Yeah.
Contrast therapy is even myself if I've had a rough day and I'm feeling just not good, I'll take a contrast shower
Yeah.
and I just feel better. You get out and you're just relaxed and just
Hmm.
it kickstarts that parasympathetic
Yeah.
uh,
Definitely.
response. So it's nice.
I'm fascinated because you've mentioned a couple times the breathing techniques and everything. Now, Phil just brought up one. Like, so what is it that? Because it do you have to like take time out in a training, or this is actually just a part of training, just like everything else, where you're preparing them for showing them breathing techniques? Because obviously my novice mind thinks like Lamaze or something like that, and I can only hope the Russian fighter you have asks, is it going to be women's breathing that day?
He actually enjoys the breathing, to be honest with you.
Oh.
He likes the breathing stuff. It's funny. You'd think, when I first got into some of the breathing stuff, you'd think that these guys, exactly same thought, like, what, breathing? We're to lay down and do breathing? And, but a lot of them, because I get them to feel it so quickly,
Mm.
and I use some of the heart rate monitors and stuff to show them the benefits, they buy into it really quickly. And they don't, I mean, so we do specific breathing where we actually lay down I incorporate breathing into my warm up.
Mhm.
We do breathing. We pretty much do breathing every day. And then once I teach it to them, then I'm using specific cues during our training. But we'll do some training where I have them nose breathe only.
Mhm.
We'll do some training where they're doing, they're using the breath as a tempo. So I say, hey, I want this many reps within this many breaths. And a lot of it is bringing a consciousness to the breath because, to be honest with you, they don't have that. And when they learn how to control that consciously, then we can learn how to control it unconsciously or subconsciously. But a lot of them don't have it. And that's some of the biggest problems they have. And I show them, like just a simple recovery breathing technique. We have a specific breathing that we did. For example, yesterday, we were trying to work on some lactate threshold work. A
Mhm.
bunch of my guys didn't bring their heart rate monitors. So what I noticed when we had our heart rate monitors is when we were nose breathing only, it was keeping them, when they got to the point where they were not able to nose breathe only, they were right about that heart rate zone where their lactate threshold was.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is very anecdotal, so I don't know if that's true or not. I only noticed this the past 2 times we did it when they had their monitors,
Yeah.
but they didn't have their monitors. So I said, all right, this is what we're going to do. I want you nose breathing only. I want you to push it until you get to the point when you can't, when you have to start breathing through your mouth. And then I want you to throttle it down just a little bit and find that barrier. And we're going to work right there for 4 minutes.
Mhm.
And it allowed me to kind of do that. And then at the very end of each round, I had them push really hard for the last 15 seconds, go all out.
Mhm.
And that last 15 seconds was just to crank their heart rate and their breathing way up. So that as soon as we said time, they sat down and they focused on bringing their heart rate back down. So really the focus of that session was the recovery breathing after getting the heart rate way up. But I've shown them multiple times because I've got a guy who's super mouth breather and he hyperventilates like crazy, chest breathes, shoulders come up. And we would put him on the bike for 3 rounds.
Yeah.
And first time I had him come in, he told me what his big problems were in training. He said he fatigued when he got to a certain point in training. He's a
Mhm.
big, strong, powerful guy. And he puts everything into everything he does. But I watched him. I put him on the bike the first time along with that Russian guy who I've been training for a few years, and he was going all out on the bike, face tense, every muscle in his body was contracting to drive this bike. And
Mhm.
when we stopped after 3 rounds, he was dead,
Wow.
gasping for air, couldn't breathe, while the Russian guy's sitting there breathing through his nose, nice and relaxed. And they're putting the same power output on the bike. So it was a
Well,
very quick way for me to show him, hey, look, you guys are doing the same amount of work. You're both putting out the same power. Look at how relaxed and calm he is. And he's got 15 more reps in him. You've got nothing left. And
what
it
was
took you 2.5 minutes to get your heart rate back down, whereas his was back down in 38 seconds.
PJ? What was the duration of the rounds that you were doing?
On the bike this time or the yesterday with the lactate threshold stuff?
Actually, both, but the bike in general for what I'm talking about. But I also want to hear what you did on the lactate threshold stuff too as well.
The rounds we were doing on the bike this time, I think were like 15 or 20 seconds.
Okay.
And really that day, the specific purpose was to teach him the recovery breathing. So I was only
Okay.
really using the bike to crank his heart rate up as high as I could, and
Mhm.
then teaching him how to use the breathing to pull it back down as fast as possible.
Okay.
And to demonstrate to him how inefficient he was at doing that, to get him to buy into the stuff we were going to have to do. Because I saw in early on in the session how bad his breathing was. So I was like, okay, we're going to use this because I need to show him how inefficient he is at this.
Mhm.
And I just started working with this guy. I don't want to spend an hour laying on his back and breathing with him. So I have to find something that'll click in his mind to show him like, hey, you need this. And
Yeah.
then I showed him, and I showed him the other guy, and I showed him how to do the breathing. And we used the heart rate monitor. And he came off the bike and pulled his heart rate back down so quickly just by focusing on the breath.
Mhm.
And I was like, there's something here, man. You see the difference? 2.5 minutes to recover your heart rate 40 beats
Awesome.
or 47 seconds.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
there's something here. Let's work on this a little bit. But then the lactate threshold work we were doing yesterday, we were doing 3 rounds of 4 minutes
Mhm.
working at their lactate threshold. So we were trying to build up to that point and
Yeah.
then there for 4 minutes. And then we shut it down. We rested for about 2 minutes to fully recover.
Okay.
We did 3 rounds of that.
Okay. Perfect.
Last week we had on Tony Ricci, the strength coach for Chris Weidman, and he mentioned that when preparing, he will try and touch every possible base to prepare his fighter, even watching video on his fighter's opponents to help develop a proper program. Now, that was a little different from the strategies of other coaches we have had on previously. What are your thoughts on something like that? And do you do anything that's out of the box from the norm of strength and conditioning strategies to prepare for fighters?
So yeah, I think that's great. I think the more information you can gather, the better. I do watch some fights with my guys. They like to share things with me, so they'll show me the guy they're fighting and his past fights, and they'll show me their sparring, and I watch as much of that as I possibly can. But I don't specifically change too much based on that kind of stuff because that's a little bit outside my scope in terms of, I think the specificity becomes a little too far, because most of my guys, again, they need so much basic stuff that if I get, and I've done it before. If I get too far down that path where I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this, and we're trying to get super specific, and I realize I'm like, all right, I got a little bit outside my bounds here, and I'm not really getting much out of this drill. So, but I do change things specifically based on what the strategy is. If I know that, hey, we're fighting a striker, and we're going to try to ground this, grapple this guy against the cage, be really strong, hold him down, ground and pound him and just grind him out because he doesn't have that good of a gas tank. Then I know in kind of this preparation, I need to prepare you to be really strong, to have good muscular endurance, to be able to hold this guy in position for a long time, and to have the gas tank to be able to push the pace so this guy gasses out if that's kind of our game plan. So I will make some specific things like that. But I'd say the stuff I do outside the box of normal strength and conditioning is taking that professional approach. And I sit down with my guys and we go through psychology, we go through goal setting, we go through, so much stuff that's outside of strength training, but it's imperative for performance. And unfortunately, it's not at the point yet that a lot of people in the sport are doing it. So even though I think some of that stuff is probably a little bit outside my scope, it's better to come from me than to not come from anybody at all.
Right.
Sure.
So, but I try my best to not get involved in the strategies or the techniques or that stuff because that's outside my scope. And luckily, my guys have work with some really high level coaches, but I do go to practices as much as possible just to hear what the coaches are saying and to see what techniques they're working on and the way they communicate with the fighters and what their focus is and that kind of stuff. So any little tidbits and pieces that I can pick up from them, maybe I watch sparring and I hear the coach, Jason Perillo, the boxing coach who works with a few of my fighters, who's phenomenal. And every time I go, I'll hear him saying something and I'm like, okay, that's something we can work on in training. She's struggling with this specific movement that he keeps wanting her to do over and over. That's something that I can reinforce in my training as well, or give her the physical skills to do that. But I'd say the biggest thing that's outside of what most guys do, besides the breathing and the pool stuff, would be the meetings that I have with these guys to look at setting their goals and taking a professional approach and the psychology of being a fighter and the preparation, the visualization and affirmations and all that kind of stuff that unfortunately it's not that prevalent because there's not that much money in the sport yet, but it will be there for sure. And I'll sit down with my guys and watch film just because I think they need to be watching more film. And I don't say much because it's not me. I can't really it's not my realm to say, oh, look at the way he does this, this, and this. That's not what I do. But unfortunately, they're not doing it with their coaches. They don't sit down with their boxing coach and watch tape and talk about how they're moving or how their opponent's moving. And if you look at any other professional sport, not even professional. I mean, I was watching in high school. We were watching game tape and tapes of practice. In high school football. But it's not very prevalent in the sport of MMA. They don't have film study as much. They kind of just go and train and go and train and go and train. But it'll get there. I truly believe that that's where the sport will go eventually, when there's more money in it. So there's more professionals in it, and there's more professional approach. And it's no lack on some of those other skill coaches either, because to be honest, maybe they're not getting paid that much. So them, it's like, hey, I train this guy 4 or 5 times a week. I'm not getting paid to follow him around and to go to his house and watch tape with him and to do all this stuff. I've got 27 other fighters I got to train to pay my bills. So
Very true, man. Very true. I like the fact that you're talking about film study with these fighters because we do have to make sure that we are making the steps in the right direction to become a true professional organization. And even when I played in college, we watched our practice film, our scrimmages, broke down every little step that we took. Now, with the fighters, even just watching sparring film, this can give us a good indication of what we need to work on in the future, pre-camp and going into camp. And not necessarily so much on the opponent in general, because the opponent's going to change his game up depending upon, you as an opponent. So we need to make sure that we are working towards getting the fighter or themselves better from just an overall biomechanical standpoint, in a sense. Does that make sense, PJ?
yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly what I said. I've got a young guy who's out here from Italy, and he's training with my other UFC guy who's from Italy. He's out here for 3 months, and I sat down with him. We were out in Vegas at the UFC Performance Institute, and we got a little conference room in the hotel, and we sat down and did some whiteboard talks.
Nice.
And I was talking to him about filling those gaps during the day. I said, "Here's your training schedule. Let's fill this stuff in, and you're only 20 years old. He's got 5 or 6 pro fights. Like, you have a lot to learn about the game. So just watch fights. I don't care who it is. Just go. If you listen to like Dominic Cruz talk, and Dominic Cruz even says he's such a strategist now because he's an announcer. He's watched so many hours of fighting that he can break down so many little things. And just like you just mentioned, Phil, I mean, in college we used to watch our practices, and every route you ran, he was like, "Hey, why'd you take this step here? See how the defender's here? You should have reacted this way." But there's so much learning that goes into that these guys are only getting in sparring, and they can't. There's only so many hours in a week you can spar. There's only so many hours a week you can train, but you've got downtimes where you can be getting better mentally. And this fighter, he really likes the way Cody Garbrandt fights, and he has a very similar style to Cody. So he started going back, and he just studies Cody's fights.
Yeah.
He watches all of his fights. He watches the way he moves. He watches what he does. And I'm like, don't watch it as a fan. Watch it as studying. Watch what he does. When he threw that hard punch and he rocked the guy, watch the steps he took beforehand. Watch how he moved his hands. Watch how he feinted. Watch how he set it up. And start to take notes and write that stuff down. And even if you feel like you haven't done anything, if you did that for an hour a day, that's, let's say you did that 5 days a week for your whole training camp. By the time you get to your fight, that's maybe 50, 60 hours more that you've gotten watching and learning than you would have had before. There has to be benefits that come from that.
For sure. And getting back to the film study, I remember we'd watch film study, but basically it was to get your ass chewed out for doing the wrong thing.
Oh yeah.
Type experience there, and you get called out.
When you had that practice the day before, and you screwed up, you dropped the ball, you ran a shitty route, and you're like, oh no, just all you're doing is fearing film study the next day because they're going to rewind that 17 times. Nestler, what the hell was this you're doing? Oh, here it is.
I had to put my head down a couple of times, just like shit. And it's funny because and getting back to studying other fighters that you feel that work good with your style, and I hate to say this. Well, I'm not gonna say I hate to say this, but I work with Hector Lombard now. Hector's my boy. But when I was coming up as a fighter, I used to watch Hector's fight films and watch him and in utilizing what he did from his approach, and not so much from a technicality standpoint, but just the ferociousness of how he just went about competing. And it really did help me carry over into my own fight. So it's definitely a good thing to do. And I think that we need to make a step more towards doing these film session studies and getting these guys capable of learning from that aspect. But now I saw on Instagram, this was the other day, and you know what I'm talking about, PJ. It put a smile on my face. I'm not going to lie, because it was to debunk the running in sand, quote unquote, speed work that I see a ton of people do. And and I haven't seen a post, and I suggested to PJ and to check it out. But anyways, if you haven't seen it, go to his Instagram and check this out. But how do you incorporate lateral speed and quickness into your fighters program, and what are your steps that you take to progress them forward?
We do a good amount of lateral speed work throughout the whole duration of our training program. So I try to work in really the kind of my plyometrics program has three phases. It's an absorption phase, a production phase, and a potentiation phase. Those are just names I gave to those phases because I used to teach seminars on that stuff. But the absorption phase is really teaching them how to absorb force in different planes of motion, different directions, different, amounts of force, all that kind of stuff. And I usually, if I'm lucky and the fighter came to me outside of training camp, we do that during our structural balance and our early on phases as we're building some foundational patterns and strength. Then we'll get more into a force production phase, and I break that out into more concentric force production. So we'll do some static, a lot of different types of static jumps, med ball throws, and stuff with bands. Those are kind of the three primary things I do. And then we'll have more dynamic, where we're utilizing the stretch shortening cycle. And then I'll get into my potentiation phase, and that's where it's more reactive jumps. So everything is super elastic. It's all multiple reps, and the goal there is speed of contraction, and we're maintaining, or we're peaking that kind of speed power. And where fighters fall into that phase, those different phases really depends. Again, we talked about force velocity profiling. So if I have an athlete who is very contractile, then maybe they don't spend a lot of time in that phase. We spend more time in the absorption, working on the eccentric strength so that they can be more elastic. And then we jump right into the dynamic or the potentiation stuff, and vice versa for other athletes. But those are kind of how I split that stuff up. And then I'll also do some movement. I teach basic foundational movements like shuffling and crossovers and sprinting. And I piece all that stuff together to teach them how to absorb, transfer, and produce force in multiple different directions, coming from different areas. And then I utilize that just like any other athlete. We'll do some different jumps or plyo work each day of our training. And kind of sometimes it's as a neural activation thing, but we're still getting a little bit of training effect of it. And then on some of the speed power days, it's the goal, and it's primarily what we're doing. But I'll try to train them. I don't like to always think of fighters as fighters. I try to train them as athletes, and I look at where they're inefficient at producing and absorbing that force, and then teach them how to do that more effectively, and then train it over and over. So, but a lot of what I do is basic bounding, jumping, lateral jumping, a lot of the same stuff you do. I've seen a ton of your work that you're doing on the turf out there, and a lot of the stuff that I do is very similar. It's all those kind of foundational things, but there's a lot of variations because they have to, it's not like a sprinting athlete where we can just do tons of unilateral and bilateral vertical sagittal plane stuff. These guys have to be in every plane, in every position. And, but the cool part is once they do that and they become efficient, then you can piece things together. They can be some sort of unilateral lower body thing into an upper body throw, because that's how they have to produce force in their sport. So you can piece a lot of that stuff together and have a lot of fun with it. But those are some of the methods that I use. And I do a lot of stuff with bands in my training too, working more like speed strength type things. And I use the bands to change the angles of force application and force absorption. Because I'm in more of a traditional style gym where I don't have a ton of movement space. So sometimes we don't really have the luxury of a big open turf area where we can do tons of jumps. So I'll use the bands to create some specific exercises that we can work on speed and power in different planes outside of like the traditional weight training sense.
That's awesome, man. I mean, I like the lateral quickness, force absorption, and just getting them capable of learning and moving in multi-directional, patterns. And you can see it because they come to you and they'll tell you, man, I feel way more quicker, way more elusive in my sparring, in my training. And that's a good feeling when you can see it and they can see it and they give you that feedback. It's definitely a good thing. But yeah, I do see the things that you're doing, and I like those little what are you doing? Those exercise like breakdowns on Instagram. I'm seeing a lot of. Can you go into more detail on that and what made you start doing that?
Yeah, the so I do a series every day at 5 o'clock. I post a new video, and it's just a series of. I started doing a lot of different series on Instagram. I don't. A couple years ago, I really enjoyed teaching. I was running a lot of internships and stuff, and I just started doing some videos on YouTube and videos on. I didn't really use social media at all, and then I started my Instagram specifically for just kind of showing the training stuff I was doing, and I liked it. And then people started, you know, commenting and enjoying it, so I started doing a lot more and more.
Mm,
But the series I do now, I'll just kind of select a series of exercises. So, for example, the series right now is different carry variations that I like,
yeah.
and once I decide what I'm going to do, I'll just create kind of 7 different series. So sometimes it's a progression. I did my single leg RDL teaching progression, and it was like my kind of 7 favorite step-by-step teaching progression. And then I go shoot them in the gym, and I have an assistant who puts it all together and posts the stuff, and I'll write captions. And it's just to help coaches.
Yeah.
There's so many good coaches out there, and there's so many coaches out there who lack a mentor or somebody who can show them effective ways to do stuff. And the certification world is a bunch of crap. And to be honest, there's a lot more bad trainers out there than there are good ones. So I've been fortunate enough to have some good mentors and to be able to learn some stuff. And there's a lot of things that I think I use really well. And also there's some stuff that I put out that's probably wrong. There's things that I do that I'm going to learn a couple of years from now I wasn't doing right. And I've actually learned a bunch from putting stuff out there on social media, because people will comment and say, "Hey, what are you using this for? Have you ever tried this?"
Yeah.
And it helps me to learn when I have to put words and progressions and uh, coaching tips and all that for every single exercise. I learn a ton more about that exercise that maybe I didn't know I already knew in my own mind, but I had to kind of put those pieces together. So I enjoy doing that stuff. It's kind of my way to give some stuff back and give out information, because I enjoy teaching and I really, really like it. So this one's been easier because I used to do a lot more like longer videos. As you can see on my YouTube, I've got a few different series that I used to do where I talk a lot in it. But it's tough to do that in the gym I'm at now because there's always people in there and the music's always going.
Yeah.
So now I did these series where I shoot the video and I just write the caption,
Gotcha.
just to kind of give some information for people. So,
Man, that's
and
tremendous, man.
there's some people that I follow that do similar stuff, and man,
Yeah.
I learned so much from it.
Yeah.
Following good coaches on social media. Social media can be a really bad thing if you're following some fitness celebrity who's clueless on what they're doing, but they're trying to give information.
Oh man. All the time.
But if you're following the right people, following guys like you and some guys like Joe DeFranco and all these other people that I follow,
Yeah.
man, every day I'm like, oh man, I love that exercise. But I think the key there is if you saw something, you got to reach out. Hey, what are you doing that for? Why are you doing it? Because
Exactly.
people just assume, and you get a lot of the monkey see, monkey do, and they're like, oh, I'm going to use this exercise. I'm like, you don't even have a clue what it's for, and you don't know why.
That's how it's like you see something, you're like, that's how you base your program off of. You're just gonna throw
Yeah.
it in there?
Yeah,
Right.
you can't just take something and throw it in. I'll have people tell me that, like comment, I'm going to use this, and I'm like, you train a bunch of old ladies. How are you going to use an exercise that I'm using with a professional MMA fighter to peak her 2 weeks out of a UFC fight, and you're going to take that and use it with your 70-year-old woman? Like,
They were already
I
peaked.
think you're a little misguided.
Yeah. It's funny because I'll get a lot of my online clients from overseas and things like that, and they see me training whoever their favorite fighter or whatever, and they're like, "Can we do what she's doing or he's doing?" I'm like, "No, you can't. No, fuck no.
Mean.
Like, come on, man.
But
Let's
you know
start
what's cool is when you can do something similar, and they're like, "Oh man, I was doing the same workouts as the UFC fighters." You find something simple,
Fucking
and then
Van
they see
Poel
you like, yeah, they see you post it like, "Whoa, I just did that earlier too," and this UFC fighter was doing it, and she was struggling just as much as I was.
I know it,
And they're
man.
like, "Oh,
My
now they
my regular clients do that shit to me all the time because we'll do like a glute hip activation series where it's just fire hydrants, bird dogs, things like that, and they're like, wow, I just seen Joanna and Jacek doing the same thing. I'm like, yeah, I know. So it's funny.
Oh, man. I will. That's pretty much it. Now, just before we get to social media stuff and plug a couple of things, I just wanted to ask you both a quick question because you both brought it up with the film study, and I'm surprised by that. As a fan of the sport for a long time and doing the show, I keep hearing about film study is not as prevalent in preparation. And why do you guys think that is? I mean, especially since we're getting so many athletes into MMA now coming from other sports, and both of you guys understand the background football and watching film study there. Why do you think such an important element of a lot of other major sports and film study isn't as common? Because you even have film study in boxing too. Why is it not so common in MMA? Is it like what you noted before, PJ, that it's just a lack of professionalism? Just the sport hasn't evolved yet, and guys haven't hit that kind of, and even some trainers haven't hit that professional level where something like that isn't used enough.
That's my thought. I think that the professionalism. I think the sport is still it's still archaic. It's still go out there and fight, and we need to just spar more and do more of this, and there's not that professional approach. And I've seen a lot of some of the best coaches out there that just kind of you show up to practice and you go hard, and that's what we do. So I think that's part of it, and I think the money thing. There's not that much money in the sport yet. There's not that many athletes who are making good money, so it hasn't forced the sport to evolve. Because when the money comes in, the sport will evolve. Because when fighters have a couple $100,000 to spend on really good coaching and training, and they have the options of any coach they want, it's going to force some of those coaches to take that approach. Because if not, there are some that are doing it. There's I don't know if you've spoken with Joel Jameson, if you guys have spoken to Joel Jameson, but Joel's a phenomenal coach, and he works with
I talked to Joel a couple of times actually on the heart rate variability, but definitely in that 8weeksout.com is awesome too.
Yeah, and Joel's great, and he's lucky to have a guy like Matt Hume, who is the head coach for Demetrius.
Yeah.
And they are very much from my understanding, they take a very professional approach. And Matt asks Joel how they should structure their training.
Yeah.
Even the skills training. Hey, based on what kind of the whole overall plan is, when should Demetrius be doing his jiu-jitsu? And this session, how hard should this one be versus this one? And because they take that approach, I mean, look at Demetrius Johnson and his physical skills and his conditioning. I mean, you couldn't find a fighter who's peaking more in all of those areas. And I honestly believe it's because of that approach that they take, and they're lucky to have that. But that just doesn't exist that much in this sport yet. And I do believe that when the money comes in, like you said, boxing, well, if you've got Floyd Mayweather, he has the money to got 6 coaches with him at all times. So they have the time to sit down and watch film and to do all those.
He's got 6 coaches that just watch him. Don't
Well, that's like watching film, so that's close.
Yeah, they're watching during the punch count.
That's true.
Nice sit up there. There's a nice sit up there, Floyd. Good job.
Hey, that's a good job. That makes money. Counting is that I do that, no problem.
I'll do it. Hey, for $500,000 a year just to count punches, I'll do it.
Yeah. Somebody said the same thing to me. They were like, "Hey, if he had you," or talking about Connor, if they had you there, or whatever. I was like, "Man, listen, you can pay me $1 million just to be like, hey, go ahead and run on that treadmill real quick." Do something.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that the sport is it's a primal sport, and a lot of the coaches come from a street background. They don't really have and I hate to say this, but it's not highly educated in that sense, where a lot of the football and like NFL, NBA, these guys actually, graduated, went to college, and they understand the analytics to the approaches of professionalism and even in periodization models, like understanding how to properly put together a program. I work with, and we've had Dean Thomas on the first episode, and he actually does a great job of scheduling the fighters and understanding the aerobic demands and how to make sure that they're getting what they need to throughout their entire camp. But in the same time, from a full spectrum of MMA, we're not quite there yet. And obviously, the money issue becomes a major thing, where these guys aren't getting paid like NFL guys or NBA guys or baseball players. So once that happens, once they get, somewhere and they're actually comfortable, we're talking, millions. And that way we can get paid. And then there's an extra step that we can take to making it more professional. But at the point right now, we're not there yet.
Yeah, and exactly that. And it's not. I hate to say it because it sounds like it's negative, but it is an ignorance of that stuff, and that's not a negative thing. If I'm a boxing coach and I've been coaching boxing for 40 years and that's all I've done, I've been
Yeah.
boxing. It's an ignorance to the other pieces that exist because all I know is that world I've been in, and I don't have the education
Yeah.
to see it all. And a lot of it, to be honest, is some of the ego as well. And when you do have that ignorance, you're a lot more protective of your ego because you know there's stuff out there you don't know. So you're very quick to dismiss it all as, well, this is how you prepare, this is how you do it, and that just leads to too many people, too many cooks in the kitchen, not communicating, not getting on the same page, and not really knowing their role, and then it just becomes a mess. But I mean, even a sport like football, this stuff is ingrained in all these sports. I mean, you had football is now at the point. If you looked at football 10 years ago, there was still a prevalence of the meathead strength coach in the college sector that was just
Sure.
bench, clean, squat, get big, that's what it was. But
Yeah.
there's so much more education and money in all of that area that it's evolved. And that guy has weeded himself out of the higher level collegiate programs. But it'll take a lot of time and money for that to happen. But to be honest, I hope it happens sooner than later because the people, as much as it's frustrating for guys like me and Phil, the people that are getting affected the most is the fighters.
Sure.
And there's too many fighters that have too much potential, that are losing years of their career, that are taking damage they don't need to take, and that are maybe never reaching the point that they could, or reaching their true potential because of these really inefficient, ineffective, and archaic training strategies. And that's just the unfortunate part. And it sucks when you work with a guy who is being influenced that way and driven that way, because you're, as once you get to know these athletes, all you want is to see them be successful.
Yeah,
So,
definitely. Well,
I mean, is there anything you PJ, like to plug before we go? We know you got to go soon. Just like I mentioned the Instagram earlier, but you can mention again Facebook, Twitter account. Let them know about your YouTube page, any websites you have for people that aren't following, so they can continue to get the amazing knowledge and get these fascinating tips, these great videos that if they're not on it yet.
yeah, for sure. I mean, if anybody wants to find information from me, like Phil said earlier, I put a lot of content out every single day on my Instagram, my YouTube, my Facebook. They're all kind of similar. Probably Instagram and Facebook are the ones I use the most because YouTube, I don't post every day. Most of those things you can find. Actually, I'm going to change my Instagram handle so that you can find everything for me under just Coach PJ Nestler. So I'm probably going to do that today. But those are really the things. And then the one other thing I have for anybody, if they are interested in training programs, I do have a training program I wrote for Fight Camp Conditioning, which is a 12-week program for jiu-jitsu athletes. Pretty simple, basic, but a very good kind of guideline for people to follow if they don't have a strength and conditioning coach. That's called Submission Strength, and that's on Fight Camp Conditioning. But outside of that, if people are interested in my content, definitely check out my channels, and you'll see a lot of stuff, especially if you heard about the breathing, the pool training. There's going to be a lot of really cool stuff coming from XPT, from me and from XPT in the next few months. So stay tuned for that.
Phil, your social media so everybody can know.
Yeah, so Instagram and Twitter is Daru Strong, and my Snapchat Daru Strong 1. You can find me on Facebook, Phil Bam Bam Daru. Also, I will also be coming out with something for Fight Camp Conditioning. It's a 12-week boxing conditioning program. So go ahead and
Awesome.
check that out. It's coming out soon. Yeah. So, but yeah, man. And then also, I'll be getting on YouTube pretty soon. You can find that. Just search my name, Phil Daru, and be putting out more content on there. And if you want to do some online programming, online training, go ahead and just go to my website, darustrong.com, and we can make that happen. If you have any questions here, hit me up on my email, phil@darustrong.com. And PJ, thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate it. And just keep doing your thing, brother. I'm really liking what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you guys very much for having me. This is always fun for me to talk combat sports. So I appreciate you guys taking the time and having me on.
Thank you so much for being on. Now, for anybody else in terms of social media, please don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Fight Strength Podcast, on Twitter at FightStrength_. PJ Nestler, thank you so much for coming on. I am Jason Burgos. He is Phil DeRue. Check us out next time for episode 15. Bye-bye.